I'm Matt Booker.
I'm Dave Laird.
I'm Jonathan Lethem, and this is Concavity Show.
Oh.
Jonathan Lethem, welcome to episode 87 of Concavity Show. It is incredible to have you. You are a writer, Jonathan, that we have talked about for the past decade on this show. Your name has come up a lot.
In fact, Dave, I just was looking at your best reads of last year, and Dave just read Fortress of Solitude in 2024.
That's right.
And that was on his best of
Thank you. That's
2024 list.
Yeah, it was a way overdue read for me. I'd been on my to be read list for like a decade or so, but I finally got around to it and adored it. I was mad at myself for not having read it 10 years ago.
Glad it's holding up.
Yeah, for sure.
We don't abide by so much, even though we do try to promote new books. We don't always abide by just speaking about books that came out in 2025. A lot of times you just get around to reading it whenever. So anyways,
I'm a used bookstore guy. I always feel there's something weird about the situation. When a book is new, it's kind of like a suspicious object.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I like them older, and so
tried and true and all that.
A lot of smoke gets blown when you publish things, and of course there's all kinds of disappointments possible too. But a book doesn't really exist in my mind until it's like been sitting around for a while, and someone sort of says, "Yeah, I heard you published a book this year, but I just read, whatever, Girl in Landscape, and my God, that was really good." And I'm like, "Okay, that's what I was waiting for."
Good. Okay.
That's when the book is real to me.
All right. So you have a new book of short stories coming out this month, September 23rd, from HarperCollins, called A Different Kind of Tension, and we will just not even talk about that book at all.
No.
Doesn't make sense.
No, but a lot of those, of the stories in it.
stuff.
I'll do your actual bio, but a lot of the new book, A Different Kind of Tension, new and selected stories. So I would say many of these, if not most of them, are selected from your previous collections, correct?
Yeah, well,
Many of them.
About 50% of the book, maybe a little more, is from previous collections. Another, I don't know, I won't do percentages. Another chunk of it, the whole last 100 pages or so, are new stories, right, since the last collection. But the other trick to this book is that I went back and found sort of like the B-sides, the abandoned children, and rounded up a lot of stuff that hadn't gotten collected. So I actually think of it, even though it's a new and selected, which is a very kind of upstanding and honorable milestone to reach. I think of it as like a box set where there's also these sort of sweepings and demos and some unusual stuff in there as well.
Yeah, and some stories that are, maybe it's some of the newer ones that were in the New Yorker and have not yet been collected. And, rather than wait around to write a whole new collection, I like that idea of kind of gathering almost like a bit of a greatest hits with, like you said, a box set where there's some really small pieces that just didn't fit anywhere else. Some other things that you've also polished a little bit that were maybe slightly updated from some of the previously published versions as well.
A few of the oldest stories seem to need a little tinkering, yeah.
By and large, when you came back to the older stuff, Jonathan, did you feel like a sense of relief with your earlier work? Did you feel like some cringe factor? Like how does it feel to come back to a piece after, I don't know, 15 or 20 years and look at it again?
Well, I mean, the finished book is the good news. Those are the ones I still got along with. Behind that, I wanted to really play fair, but also learn where I'd been and who I'd been. So I gathered everything I could find. I mean, there are actually a few stories I couldn't find that were published in such marginal ways that I no longer had a copy, and it wasn't anything anyone had scanned. And but I put together something like a 1,500-page PDF, from beginning to end, and read the entire thing a few times. just responding to the pieces, and of course, a lot of them didn't hold up. So there were, it wasn't even like it didn't even qualify as having to kill darlings. It was more like sweeping roadkill out of the path of the vehicle. But so what you see in the collection are the ones that still make sense to me, or or even nicer, the ones that surprised me, that kind of came out of nowhere, and I thought, oh, I undervalued that at the time, or I was embarrassed by that for some reason at the time, but now the context has fallen away, and it looks like looks worth enshrining.
So we didn't do a proper bio for you, which I do have, but let me just say that by my count, you have about 13 novels now.
I think that's right. I think Brooklyn Crime Novel was the 13th.
13th. And then a number of short story collections, depending on what gets counted as a novella or a standalone, doesn't fit into a category. Maybe 6 short story collections.
Yeah, it'd be sort of between 4 and 6.
Yeah.
Based on how you count.
There's some weird books, a bunch of nonfiction books, including one of my favorites, The Ecstasy of Influence. Love that book. It's a wonderful collection. Cellophane Bricks, which just came out last year, end of last year.
Yeah, yeah. It was early last year.
Which is a book of visual art, 2024. Writings about visual art, I should say, and then a bunch of other stuff like, introductions to books, forewords, republishing stuff, small press stuff, championing a lot of Philip K. Dick stuff, of course. I was going back just because I have the box set from Library of America, and that's I don't think I've read every one of his books, and so that's like a retirement project for me or something. Like buy all of the box sets from Library of America you can. When they go on sale, keep them on your shelves. Get the Philip K. Dick ones. I'm assuming you were deeply involved in the publication of that.
Yeah, I was the editor. I mean, they always bring in someone to kind of preside. The interesting thing about the Library of America, though, is that it's got scholarly apparatus but no introduction. So although I've written about Philip K. Dick in a number of places, there's no take.
Right.
I'm not present as a voice there, but I did have to comb through them and do the editorial annotating of notes, because they like end notes.
Yeah.
And in some cases, I learned a lot about what Philip K. Dick was thinking while he was writing, just by chasing down these references. So often it was a lot of classical music, German poetry. He sort of steeped himself in high culture, actually, a lot of the time while he was writing, and his characters make these passing references that turn out to be from operas and German romantic poetry. But then also there are references to Gilbert and Sullivan operettas, stuff I in my, I kind of grew up in like a bohemian demi-monde where my parents' record collection was all rock and roll and folk music and jazz, and their shelves were very, full of kind of mid-century hipster stuff. And I did not receive any kind of background in classical music, so it was really interesting to realize how much my hero was an opera buff.
Well, and when you're reading that stuff, you probably just gloss over a little reference, like you just keep going, and
it wouldn't necessarily draw your attention,
right.
And it certainly hadn't drawn mine.
So also in your bio, as I was going through your website, Wikipedia, all this other stuff of, 20 years ago you had a MacArthur, but this year, Guggenheim. Is that correct? 2025,
that's right.
Guggenheim.
Congrats.
And, our old buddy Wallace had a joke about the Guggenheim in a short story where there's this poet's poet, candidate for the Nobel Prize, and yet he was never a recipient of a Guggenheim. Mm-hmm. Guggenheim's famously tricky, and Wallace himself never received a Guggenheim, did receive a MacArthur, and it's sort of interesting to see the people who get that earlier in their career versus later in their career after they've published a bunch of books. So And the difference, I think, being with the MacArthur is like you don't really apply for that, right? Like
You
MacArthur
have
is,
nothing to do with that at all, and I mean, I think of the MacArthur as being kind of like the uh, the super intelligence serum that is given to the character Charlie in Flowers for Algernon. It's sort of like you have it for a while and then it wears off and you go back to being a guy in the back of the bakery with flour on his hands. So I stopped applying for things for a little while. It didn't seemly, obviously,
Fair.
it just didn't seem necessary. So then I kind of circled around to a thing that I'd only gone in for a couple of times very early on and been refused. You never know how many times someone has applied for the Guggenheim, but I think in some cases it can be a dozen before they cave in.
Yeah.
So anyway, I sort of joke that I'm moving in reverse, and that in another 10 years I'm gonna be listed somewhere as an emerging writer now.
Early stage career, recent
like
graduate,
writers under 40 to watch for, or whatever.
or
You're
under
going back in
100.
time.
70 over 70.
Right. Writers under 100. Well, in the MacArthur, I mean, it's 5 years, right? And I was, doing the math of that. It seems like maybe when that 5 years was up coincides with the time where you did land at Pomona.
It was more or less the case that I landed in that safety net of the Disney chair.
Roy E. Disney, professor
Right.
of creative writing.
I mean, the timing that I'm very conscious of. I don't know exactly where it stands in relation to the MacArthur, although you might be right. But the timing for me was I had two babies basically in the house, and suddenly the way I'd been living hand to mouth and project to project, and also doing a lot of road tripping, a lot of taking small gigs or journalism that involved travel, and being away from home to pick up the occasional checks that would keep me writing novels, didn't really look so appealing anymore. I needed to provide health insurance, and I needed to set up in a way where I could stay home with the little kids. So that's when the Disney chair was really an incredibly fortunate rescue for me.
And now you've been there, what, 15 years?
15 years. It's sort of incredible to me. Yeah.
Wow. And does this Guggenheim this year, does that coincide with any sabbatical and time off from...
Well, I happen to have just taken a sabbatical semester, and so I'm still kind of thinking about exactly how I'm going to orient around the next couple of years. But I had just been away from my teaching, and it's a small community and a small English department, and I actually have colleagues and students that I would be kind of neglecting or burdening if I just said, "Oops, I got that," and I'm running away again. So I'm back in the saddle teaching this semester, 2 courses, and I'm happy to be. I mean, I really after a little pause of I worked hard on other things in the spring. I kind of came back fresh, and I changed up my syllabus a whole bunch, and I'm just doing something that I'm excited about. So I'm really glad to be teaching right now.
So cool. This leads me to a first big question for you, which is, you've described teaching is a full-time job for many people. Writing, you've got a new book out, you just got another fellowship, you've got a lot of different projects. You did this book on visual art, you're very into music, promoting other people's work, you've got all of these other obligations. I'm always curious with artists and writers in general of like, how do you organize your time? Like, how do you do it? Like, what is your, I don't know if what's the secret, but like, to me, I'm very interested in like, how do you organize your time to do this?
Yeah, like that's in your author's note that you're proud of your commitment to practice is like kind of the final line of the intro
That's
to
right.
This new book. Yeah. So I had that sort of thought too, Matt.
Well, thanks. I mean, sometimes I feel stretched thin, and I promise myself to center more completely in just one project at a time. But these last two books, Cellophane Bricks, the book of art writings, and now A Different Kind of Tension, are both a little bit sleights of hand in that they were editorial labor. I was gathering up the work of many decades in each case, and then I added, in the case of Cellophane Bricks, probably 75 pages of new writing, and I added approximately 75 to 100 pages of new writing to satisfy myself with A Different Kind of Tension, to make it feel complete and like a real new book. But they both also are archival projects. They're kind of whatever that self-archival, self-canonizing thing is, and so in the background, I'm writing a novel very slowly. Slower than I'd prefer, but there is so much to do that interests me, and also just commitments I've made, and so I have to accept being distributed. Although in some way I'm always idealizing a state that I very rarely make contact with, which is one of just absolute fixed concentration. Matt, when you and I were planning being on this podcast and in touch last, I was at Yaddo for a little while.
Right. Oh, right.
And that was my first visit there in a really long time. Well, first time since I'd had the kids, because I never wanted to be away for that kind of, it felt impossible to claim that kind of time until they were old enough to really not care about, not need me hanging over them.
How old are your kids now, Jonathan? Are they teenagers?
15 and 18.
Yeah,
and
so that sounds about right.
They're not going to notice. So. And there I worked exclusively on this novel. I made contact with that state of being that, like I say, I idealize, but I don't get there so often. And it's very replenishing for me, but it also, paradoxically, it makes me feel safe to, come back into the mix of daily life and be teaching and editing and doing other things, because I know the novel's there. I know it responded when I gave it my sole attention, and I can think about it even when I'm not working on it. But no, it's a problem. I mean, no one who isn't trying to sell you something has a real, solvent, a patent medicine or snake oil that they can offer. Just do it this way. I wake up feeling crazy a lot of days where I'm like, what am I supposed to be working on today? Or why can't I be working on the other thing that I, feel a little more excitement about? I have to close this other file somehow. But I obviously am, addicted to the old workahol. I keep a flask of it with me wherever I go. I don't really like not writing or not doing writing related stuff.
Yeah,
I'm always
prolific. That
wanting
makes
to
sense.
be involved in something. So, so let me back up, answer almost again as if I hadn't answered. I had a lot of writers I was interested in when I was a teenager, who were also kind of doing editorial stuff or nonfiction, or and kept really, really busy. I mean, I was really into Anthony Burgess, and it arrested my attention that he had these big compilations of his book reviews, and that he was composing symphonies and writing indexes to James Joyce, who I guess was to him as Philip K. Dick is to me. And I was like, okay, maybe that's an interesting kind of novelist to be, who's just in the mix with stuff all the time. And I guess I had some, the counter example would be like, which I think is more common in some ways, is to really idealize the purity of purpose that one associates with, I don't know, Don DeLillo or writers I adore. But I just, for some reason, I think I'm more sociable with texts than would be required to be so austere.
Yeah.
I maybe that comes also from my life as a bookseller. Weirdly, like
Yeah.
just
Right.
being amid other people's texts seems really important to me all the time.
Yeah, no, I've told this story before, but one time I had to take like a corporate personality test, and it tells you like your strengths, and I try to do it as honestly as I could. But my number one strength came back and it said it was input, and I was like, is that even a fucking strength? Like, what? That's like
Human
saying like
adjective?
projects. Like I was like, what does that even mean? But then when you read the description of it, it was like you love all kinds of input into your brain, and you probably are a book collector, and
Perfect.
you probably
Yeah.
read the encyclopedia for fun, and you probably enjoy meeting new people. And I was like, oh shit, this is me to a T. And so I think there are people who, like Cormac McCarthy didn't enjoy meeting new people. He didn't want to go to a party. He didn't want to
Right on. That's just
listen
what
to
I
the
was
radio.
reaching for. Yeah. When I said sociable with
Yeah,
texts, I think,
yeah,
I mean, it's all right. So you were fated to be a podcaster.
right,
And I was fated to be the kind of author that says yes to a lot of podcasts. No
right,
offense, but,
right. Not
because
taken.
I like the conversation.
Yeah,
I like the mix. And I wanted as a counterpoint to the isolation and the purity of sitting alone in the room with, just me and my
Keyboard.
problems and the alphabet. I get plenty of that.
Yeah.
yeah. Well, and I think that the question about doing how do you organize your time is really like a question about freedom in a way of like, do you have the freedom to pursue what really interests you and in a way that really interests you? Because I like the idea of this solitary artist sort of in a monastery, like sort of just producing these sacred texts. But the reality is like there's bills to pay, and there's people inviting you out to a cool thing, and like there's people who want you to do a collection of essays or whatever. And like the reality, I just wonder, I guess, do you have the freedom you think to pursue whatever interests you like?
That's a great question to put it in terms of freedom. I mean, I've been very blessed, obviously, and I mean just the list of occasions that I've been invited into is as splendid as the projects I've conceived for myself. So one of the freedoms is to be, and they don't all pay, or they don't all pay the same, right? So I've managed to get paid enough to do some of the things that I'm thrilled to do, and to have weird, lucky, lucky breaks, like a good foreign sale or something, or a movie option for a movie that's never going to exist, but has my
But still
savings
pays.
account at the crucial moment. In order that I can say yes to crazy stuff, uh, you know, um, random stuff or non-remunerative stuff, which to me, the freedom that I really cherish is the freedom to remain an amateur, if that makes sense. To not
Love that.
professionalize every gesture, but to do a lot of stuff that is more like, from my coming of age in the zine universe. And then, if I'm really lucky, and I have been, a chance will come to scoop up some of that stuff into a compilation. I mean, the two books that I think of that way are Ecstasy of Influence, the one you mentioned, and Cellophane Bricks, the book of art writings. Both of those are books that kind of were gifts. They arrived when I realized I'd done so much eccentric, sporadic, amateurish kind of involvement that I could make a case that it was that it had a kind of implicit statement in it cumulatively.
Well, and I think both of those books also show your range of interests, which is like it's not just Philip K. Dick or music or Berkeley in the '70s or
Comic
it's
books.
it's comics. It's like your range of interests is really fascinating in a way that a lot of artists don't. I do think of one of my personal heroes, sort of out of fashion now, is like John Updike had a book of he did a lot of New York Review books, essays of like they would send him to whatever the newest exhibit at the Met was, and he would He wrote a book of art essays, right? Very few people have done that, as well as write short stories. And, he wrote like a play.
He's got poetry as well.
Poetry and children's books. And
I mean, it is a certain kind of model that these aren't all my very favorite novelists, but it's very mid-century white male model. Like if you think of Martin Amis, Updike was like that, Gore Vidal was like that. The sort of like man of letters, and Burgess, like I said.
Nabokov,
Yeah, you write to a lot of occasions, and you end up with these compilations. Now, my behaviors are not always quite so posh as those gentlemen. Like I write a lot of things for kind of below the radar destinations, not the New York Review books. I sometimes do write for the New York Review books, but I sometimes also, like that book on They Live. It's a little bit like a bit more feral, I guess. Some of my side projects. And like I said, that's that part of me that wants to remain an amateur, wants to remain kind of in an unfinished state, wants to be playing with things that are off the official radar, off the commercial, they're counter commercial gestures.
Yeah. Well, and when you get that many books, I mean, you're making some royalties. There's books being made about you. You've achieved so much. You've won the National Book Critics Circle Award. You've won other awards. You've achieved a lot. So you mentioned a work in progress. Like what are you sort of striving toward now? I mean, do you feel like you have the energy, the imagination, the inspiration to sort of surpass your earlier work and still do your best work ahead of you?
Well, it's such a if I take that question into my body, really, it's like the question, right?
Right. Yeah.
I think that I'm alive to the possibility that I could still do work that that would stand with the most, what do I want to call it, the most fulfilled experiences I've had. And sometimes that correlates to what other people would project. Mm-hmm. For me, I mean, you mentioned Fortress of Solitude. That was a book I didn't, at the time I wrote it, I didn't know I had it in me. I believed it was worth trying, but I finished it when I was, I don't know what I was, 36 or, is that right? I'm 60 now, but and then you stare at a thing like that for a little while, and the next thing I did was I wrote a story collection. I wrote a cycle of personal essays, The Disappointment Artist. I wrote a kind of a somewhat goofy comic novel about a rock band, which was designed to be almost taken as a B-side or a
entertainment. It's an entertainment.
Entertainment. There you go. And then I took a deep breath and I wrote a book that matters to me, if anything, even more than Fortress of Solitude, which was Chronic City.
Chronic City. That was my first introduction to your work.
And then I was like, hey, maybe I can die now. That's pretty good. But I didn't want to die, and I didn't want to stop writing. And so you look around and you think, what's possible? What do I have to say? What are my tools? Because you're acquiring new tools, And the thing that's happened to me most lately, I mean, I can make a case for any of the books. And I'm very susceptible. I think this is true of a lot of writers, but some of them, it's appallingly obvious that if you walk up to them and you say, what I think your best book is, I think it's, You Don't Love Me Yet, and the person is like, oh, thank God, someone finally sees it. That's actually the one. I can, on the right day, I can feel kind of equally amazed that I wrote nearly any of the novels. But there's also something that happens when you live long enough to be able to look at your older work as if it was by someone else. And the thing that happened to me, and it corresponded to the COVID lockdown time, was that I realized that I not only wasn't completely satisfied by the Fortress of Solitude, but that I could think about it in a way that projected a enormous new landscape and of possibility. And then I wrote this book called Brooklyn Crime Novel, which, to me it doesn't really matter. A few writers have written really, really beautifully, really gratifyingly about it. But even if no one had recognized it, I knew that I was in a space that was extraordinary for me, and that the way I was able to both reconnect with the Brooklyn material, but turn it inside out, in a sense, and
it's a longer book too. I mean, it's clearly a lot of you in that book.
There's a lot of me in that book,
and some of your earliest works, and I think what you built your reputation on was often, some really imaginative and speculative stuff that was, less realistic. I mean, the Fortress of Solitude, Chronic City, there's a lot of realism in those books, but also
a lot of fantastical.
I guess the undercurrent of what I was saying too is also like effort, and like, as I get older, I'm like, man, you really have to work up some physical effort to put into these books.
Absolutely, it's an underrated description, I think, of the novelist's life trajectory, is that you need, it's not, you can't just sort of breathe a great song or a great poem or a spectacular painting out and then collapse on your sickbed for 6 months. You sort of have to get up every day and be vital and energetic. It's a lot more athletic in a way, and but I mean, not athletic like a
It's a marathon, though.
Dunked basketball. Like it's more like a marathon, or like,
it's a
or
regiment,
like,
there's a regiment.
absolutely. There's this necessity of, but also a novel is a complex structure with all these internal system relations, and now some of those wear that fact on their sleeve, and you become amazed by the internal system relations. Some of them sublimate that fact, but they all need to work that way, especially as they grow longer. And that's a memory art. Mm-hmm. You need to remember the whole novel, which is another kind of stamina or sort of physical capacity, obviously one that degenerates. And so, can I still write as intricately interrelated a long text as I did when I wrote, say, Chronic City or Dissident Gardens? Right. Well, I did it again at a level that was very exciting for me with Brooklyn Crime Novel. But, it's interesting that the distinction you make, that's probably the least fantastical
right.
Of all my novels. Even Dissident Gardens has these sort of fugue-like, moments when characters are tripping out on history, and suddenly Archie Bunker comes to life, or Abraham Lincoln is talking to them, and this was almost more like a documentary film,
the style
hidden inside a novel.
It was like very stripped down too. I mean, a lot of the pages were fragmented, the shorter paragraphs, shorter sentences, and just that was a totally different style, which I really loved as well, and got to read a couple years ago when it came out. But let's talk about this book a little bit, because I went and marked up the table of contents of saying, oh, I think I've read this, and then I had to pull out the other books and be like, oh, this is from The Wall of the Sky, The Wall of the Eye. This one is from Lucky Allen. Some of these I've never read before. Some of these are from The New Yorker, which, read and often just throw out after I do the crossword. So I can't
do that crossword.
I fucking love it, man. I love it. I love it. I'm a big crossword guy. But anyways, the New Yorker ones, some of those I do want to talk about. But in last time you and I really had a substantive conversation was about Lucky Allen. So I feel like I had some good notes on on that. Although
Mm-hmm.
the way that the table of contents is structured is by year, right? So there are some that's the year you wrote them, right? Is that the year that they were written, not
That's the
published?
year they were published, actually.
Published. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Because
I believe that's right.
there's
Well, when published not in the book collections, but published in their original magazine
okay.
or wherever they
First
first appeared.
publication. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
So the years don't indicate the years of say Lucky Allen or
Right.
Men in Cartoons. The years indicate the first time the story appeared in print.
Right. Okay. So one of the first stories that I wanted to talk to you about was Super Goat Man, which I freaking love this story. It was
Yeah, this is
originally in the
great.
New Yorker, I guess, way back in like 2004. Was it collected anywhere else?
That was in Men in Cartoons.
Men in Cartoons.
Yeah.
Okay. And then
Yeah.
Vivian Ralph is the same year, 2004. I
Yes.
think so.
Yes.
I love both of those stories. They're back to back in this collection, and they're fantastic, like opposition stories. Like, Dave, what did you think of either one of those stories? Did you take any notes on Super Goat Man?
Yeah, Super Goat Man is like just so dark and hilarious in the way that this poor superhero just kind of gets relegated to small town college, gets called out by these fucking frat boy kids on the like bell tower, water tower, sustains like a really traumatic moment where unrequited superhero stuff happens that he couldn't save somebody. And yeah, and then contrasted to Vivian Ralph is just like, here's another story about unrequited, more like love or like a misconnection, I guess, in this case, of two people who meet at a party who think they've met before, but they can't place it, and they keep bumping into each other over the years, and where their lives go, where they take them. So quite contrasted, but yeah, the kind of like unrequited
Well, and
idea
I guess that's
connects
one of the
them
themes in the
nicely.
book too, right? Is like you mentioned you saw a lot of stuff you had predicted and things that sort of emerged as themes, and that sort of missed connections of people who want to be together but can't, or want to make some kind of connection and can't.
Yeah, I think the quintessence of that theme became apparent to me pretty early on with a story called Five Fucks,
Yeah.
which is a
Great
kind
title.
of it's a series of genre parodies. There's a film noir parody within the story, and then there's sort of a comic book parody, and there's a Victorian parody like George Gissing. There's a thing written sort of in the style of George Gissing, but I began to realize how fundamental this sense of the blown opportunity, the missed connection, the person fated to be, if you look at the novels, you've also got the runaway mother or the dead mother, or in Chronic City, you've got the woman trapped in orbit sending letters. The sort of unreachability, and Vivian Ralph is it was a riff on Nabokov in some ways, and that's why there's that little scrap of poetry in there, and
It's like Vivian Darkbloom, right?
yeah, the name Vivian, absolutely. But I think that it's in a way a story about imaginative. It's not a fantastical story. It's interesting to talk about those two, Super Goatman and Vivian Ralph at the same time, because this is basically the year where I allowed myself to write without a literal fantastic motif, a surreal or science fictional or fantastical motif for the first time. I'm writing You Don't Love Me Yet at that point, after Fortress of Solitude, which Fortress of Solitude contains so much, sort of social realist urban depiction, but then there's the magic ring and the flying
Yeah.
superpowers. And for however inconsequential it may seem, You Don't Love Me Yet was the first novel I'd written that didn't have a fantastic element. Well, then again, Motherless Brooklyn doesn't.
Right.
It has instead it has a
couple
kind of
little things. It was a couple
neurological
little things.
superpower that distorts the field. The Tourette's becomes a kind of hyper object within the book that alters everything it touches. But Vivian Ralph is one of the first short stories I wrote without a fantastical element. And yet again, the imaginative gulf between these two, that they seem to come from some alternate reality where they belong together, but they can't prove it in this reality. This world doesn't recognize them, but some other world might have. Makes it very much in a way, a retake on Five Fucks.
Yeah. Well, and I should say, even though those stories were in Min and cartoons, that the stories that were not pulled out of there are also really good. I was thinking that when I was looking at Lucky Allen again and The Wall of the Sky, The Wall of the Eye. Like, there's stories that were not selected out of here. And then I think Updike has a line that says, like, a collected stories is for after you die, and it's for someone else to decide. Like, the collected stories of Jonathan Lethem will probably be a multi-volume set from Library of America someday, but it will be not up to you to what goes into there. As you know, it'll be some other academic who does.
As a fan, as a bookseller and a book collector and a reader, I was really conscious of these differences, and I sort of looked closely at examples. Okay, what does it mean when you have a new and selected in your own, working lifetime? You're not either dead or just, really close to it. But Stephen Milhauser has one like that. And
I love his stories, man. His stories are incredible.
He's an amazing story writer, just incredible. And it's formatted, that was a very important model for me with this one. And you can see Charles Baxter has one like that. He's still in the midst of his working life. He might write another, 30 or 40 short stories before he's gone, but he's ready. He's had enough published that he's ready for a new and selected. And so I looked at those books and tried to fathom why they worked the way they did.
I'm also a Charles Baxter fan, and I think, some of these other writers too have had books that were maybe out of print and maybe published in weird ways, and so it was a sort of preservationist thing to recollect them. But the story in here that, I'm skipping around. We could go down the list and go through every one of these stories, which would take more time than we have today. But
we could start a whole podcast around that.
Right, just go through every story. Take 62-hour series.
It's called Jonathan Lethem Should Win the Nobel Prize.
That's right. That's our friend Jeff Severs has a podcast called Don DeLillo Should Win the Nobel Prize.
I saw that. That's great. I like that. I think I follow them on Instagram. On principle.
Yeah. Solidarity with the title.
But I'm going to interrupt you and say I did once write a letter to the Nobel Committee nominating Stephen Dixon for the Nobel Prize.
Wow. That's a huge.
Never saw any
deal.
Any action on that, but
right.
I should go put a wager down, and you can always bet on who wins the Nobel Prize. That's the type of shit that they would do. That would be like no Thomas Pynchon, no Don DeLillo. It would be like Stephen Dixon. Would be like, he's a fantastic writer, though. Good for him. But I was saying we could go through all these, but I just really want to talk about the last one, the Red Sun School of Thoughts. And I think of the ones I had not read before, this obviously is probably the longest one, the most substantive one, and it really stuck with me. And I actually went and read it a couple of times with notes after I finished it, because it's long enough that, I don't know, it's sort of in that gray area between like novella. Maybe even a novella.
I actually wanted it to, I was eager for it to be a novella, and then I just had to, step back and say, better that it be a long story and surprising as a long story than it be a disappointingly short novella, because I'd landed just, I think, shy of confidently calling it a novella. But to me, that story has the implicit space in it of a short novel.
Yeah, it's like 40, 42 pages, 41 pages, something like that.
And so it's from a young boy's perspective. The mother is dying. The father leaves home to go move into a commune in San Francisco, 1976. And
the year before Star Wars comes out, right?
Just before Star Wars comes out. Yeah. The drumbeat of approaching Star Wars is one of the details in the...
Yeah, and I've heard that you saw that quite a few times in the theater.
I did. It's humiliation. I can't believe I've given this fact out into the universe.
I told my 4-year-old son that right before we got on the call, actually, because he's quite obsessed with Star Wars and Star Wars Lego. And I was like, I'm going to talk to this guy. He loves Star Wars too. And he was like, oh, cool.
It was a much bigger deal. I had to get on the subway every day and go to Times Square to watch the movie.
Oh, yeah. That's
it wasn't easy in those days. Tell your kid he has it easy.
This is the year I was born, in 1976, and so it's the bicentennial year, which is sort of like not cool, especially in San Francisco, to even talk about. It's kind of cringe. But I had a question on the Red Sun, Krypton reference, like the Red Sun.
So there's a really weird explanation about the source for the title, and whatever implication you find.
I don't want to spoil it, but if you don't mind,
it's not a spoiler. It's a kind of a hook. So you know how AI these days is kind of destroying the internet. I mean, internet was already plenty destroyed, but
wasteland.
They're bombing the wasteland with these sort of phantom websites that emulate other kinds of websites just to lure you in, these kind of junk websites, things that used to be probably very laboriously constructed by content farms. So there was this website that was doing quotes from great books. You know, and everyone's run into these quotes from great books sites. Well, this was a kind of AI mimic clone of a great books quotes website, but it had all kinds of, what do they call it, hallucinations baked into it. And it also was constructed by people who were, who'd given the AI the command not to risk any copyright infringement. So ironically, all the quotes from great books were made up. And there was this whole string of appallingly banal, ostensible quotes from motherless Brooklyn on this website. Saying really like greeting card sentiments that I would never in a million years have put in a book. So that was sort of embarrassing and funny. But then in order to flesh out their website, they also had an author bio. And the author bio that the AI had generated for me was like 90% cobbled together from Wikipedia or other, typical online sources. But then it was 10% insane hallucinations. And one of them was that it said that I'd, as a child, grown up in part in a commune in San Francisco called the Red Sun School of Thoughts.
And you're like, fuck yeah, let's do it.
The name of the commune in this, I mean, first
Perfect.
of all, I did live partly in communes as a child, but in New York City.
Right.
I was never west of Nebraska until I was 19 years old. So ipso facto, this story is a fiction, if in no other way, then no part of my childhood was spent in the Bay Area, let alone in the Red Sun School of Thoughts, which I'd never heard of. But I was like, that term is so weirdly specific and pregnant. They must have stolen it from somewhere. So then I started Googling around, and I couldn't find a reference on the Red Sun School of Thoughts. The AI had totally just burped out this cool title, and I was like, well, I'll take that. I'm very happy to help myself to that, because it implied I just talked about Vivian Ralph, that maybe their love existed in some other world, but they couldn't authenticate it in this one. Well, maybe I had a second childhood that the AI is privy to and I don't know about, and it was in San Francisco. So I suddenly saw it as a vehicle for all of these things that I'd actually left out of other autobiographical coming-of-age stories, Fortress of Solitude, and there are elements of Transmuted, but there are elements of my coming of age in New York City, again in a different way in Dissident Gardens. And so I thought, well, let me write my childhood over again, but with the Red Sun School of Thoughts as the central site.
So now that site is accurate. It is accurate.
So now I've
Grow up
definitely made things very confusing.
Absolved the AI now.
Well, it's a weird thing, because when I was Googling it, the thing that kept coming up was was Superman, right?
I guess it would seem like that. Yeah.
Krypton has a red sun, Earth has a yellow sun.
Right.
Just visually in the comics, it was a way of distinguishing Krypton from Earth.
Oh, yeah.
It's like he lives in this sort of upside down world where he comes
Yeah.
from. He's an alien. They have a red sun, and also David Foster Wallace has a short essay called Big Red
Big
Sun.
Red Sun.
SON.
porn.
Big Red
Yeah.
Sun.
Right.
And that is a
porn
reference to
awards.
porn, right?
Yeah.
Which is like the big red sun of sort of.
I remember that piece. It's funny. Well, so I hadn't thought of this association, Matt, but it's kind of perfect in that it also embeds a weird glance at the Fortress of Solitude. I mean, one of the weird things, just like being embarrassed by Star Wars, that I was so into it. You know, I cast myself as a much bigger Superman guy than I ever really felt that I was.
Named the book The
By
Fortress of
naming the
Solitude.
book The
Yeah,
Fortress
yeah,
of Solitude.
yeah.
And I was always like, no, wait, I was into Marvel. Marvel was so much cooler. But then, you know, you also sometimes you have to accept how much this stuff has colonized your imagination. That, you know, talking about kryptonite and you know, the different colors of kryptonite. There's actually a piece in the book on art writings. My collaboration with Raymond Pettibone is called Black Kryptonite. And I was smashing together abstract expressionism and the different colors of kryptonite, and you know, because Ad Reinhardt made these all black paintings
Yeah.
that are kind of the most resistant, you know, the ones that you can't fathom.
Well, I think it's a fantastic story. The Red Sun School of Thoughts. It's never really defined what sort of commune or cult that
Yeah.
it is. It's just a bunch of weird hippies who live together, and they're kind of thrown together probably because rents are cheap. And I don't want to spoil it about the leader of the Red Sun School of Thoughts. I think the reveal of who the leader is and how the leader functions is fantastic reveal. Shocking, but also fits with a lot of your themes and some of the other stories. And I think it's a great achievement, and that you did a fantastic job taking what sounds like a writing prompt from an AI engine and turning it into a real work of art. So it's a wonderful story. It's a perfect,
Thank
I would
you.
say, capstone to the collection.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And there's a bit of metafiction in it too, right? Because you do try to put it in there of like, this is really me. I grew up there.
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah, I fooled with that before in different ways. There's that story in the middle of the book. It's small and kind of silly story in some ways, the interview with a crab, but where I do the Philip Roth trick of giving the
Use your name.
narrator my own name and making him kind of
Right.
a slightly stupider version of
And then the
my
crab gets it wrong.
journalistic self.
The
That's
later
right.
half of the
Yeah.
story. Yeah.
Yeah.
The name keeps changing.
Yeah, I have had to spend my whole life correcting the pronunciation of my name. People will say Lethem, and I have to say Lethem. You know, it's like almost like sneezing. Lethem. I have to keep saying. So I think the crab mispronouncing the character's name was my way of working through some of that
Yeah.
animus. But there's something in that story that's different for me. I mean, I don't actually usually make writers the narrators of my stories. I grew up with certain writers that I really loved who did this congenitally. I mean, one of them is very out of fashion, maybe permanently out of fashion, W. Somerset Maugham. But when I read, you know, Cakes and Ale when I was a teenager and The Razor's Edge, the way he would do this sort of frame device where there was always a W. Somerset Maugham who was at a dinner party and met this extraordinary character, and then you sort of melt from there into this character's, you know, adventures and suddenly it's a novel. In a way, it's a very fusty kind of gentleman's club form of storytelling. You know, H.G. Wells uses this in some short stories too, like, I was at the Explorers Club and I met the most extraordinary man. But in another way, it's very
Smoking
Philip
5
Roth.
Macanudos.
It creates this Philip Roth effect of knitting what everyone knows going in, which is that Philip Roth exists, and beguiling you into a kind of relationship to the fiction that's, you know, animated by the anxiety that you might really be learning something about a real person, and that the writer might finally just be exhausted by fiction and just telling you things that they know. And I think, Roth figured out how to exploit that really brilliantly. And it's maybe forgotten that I think, for what it's worth, Malm also did the same trick. But I also had another model in mind for one more, again, maybe sort of out of fashion model. There's a great Graham Greene novella called Under the Garden about a character's childhood. And I don't know why it's always haunted me, but I think that Red Sun School of Thoughts was in some way an attempt to do a version of this Graham Greene piece.
Well, and there's a lot of you've mentioned this a couple times of sort of going over some familiar territory, and the rewriting a bit. Dissonant Gardens has some similar themes in it as Chronic City, or I mean of Fortress of Solitude, and this again, of being a bunch of stories in here have a younger boy as the sort of main focus or the main character. That's a common theme, and yet I think of other writers who do similar things where they're sort of rewriting the same universe over and over and over in a lot of ways. And in a way, that's sort of like giving the people what they want, which is like why there are so many goddamn Marvel movies. It's like, just do another one. It's like, do it part 5, Iron Man 10, whatever it is, like, just do it again, because that's what people want. It's like, it would be better if you just gave me another one of those, or let's do another Star Wars one, or another TV. Like, there's something serializing that's comforting. That's once people like your work, they want more of it.
Well, I've tended to have a kind of a fascination with the attempt to get outside of my own methods or motifs. I really have a fixation on the career of Thomas Berger, who seems to write as different a book as he can each time out. A Western and a Western epic, and then a dark novel of menace, and a kind of a Midwestern crime novel, and then a romantic comedy, and he just migrates deliberately every time out, and yet his voice is so obsessional and so particular, and so you end up in a way seeing him even more completely because of the attempt to transform.
Obscure it, yeah.
And I always thought that was probably the best kind of project, long term. If I got to be a writer with 10 or 15 or 20 novels, it would be that they would seem apparently as different as they could be. But in it, you can't escape yourself, and so you're going to start reworking certain kinds of motifs. I know when there were moments where I came across. I kind of came out of hiding to myself, and I was like, "Oh, look, the mother's going to die again, or the woman's going to be missing."
Yeah.
In this way, where I'm returning to my baseline condition, helplessly.
Right. And I have to just insert a Thomas Berger note, which is I spent probably 6 months reading Thomas Berger. Dave, I don't know if you remember, on my list of books, maybe 2 years ago, was one of his books called not Harry Cruise. It's like Harry Cruise, but it's Robert Cruise. It's based on like a Harry Cruise, and they crash in the wilderness, and it's like the children's book Hatchet, where it's like the plane crashes in the wilderness and I have to escape. It's a fucking amazing book, and it's like underappreciated, underread.
I haven't read that one again since it came out. I should go back and check that one out.
It's fantastic.
What are some others that stay with you, Matt? What are your favorites?
Thomas Berger?
Yeah.
I mean, Little Big Man, my dad was obsessed with as a kid.
It's an incredible book.
Little Big Man, the book, the movie, all of it was just part of our like vernacular. I don't know. I haven't read. I need to go look at his list of. He's got those, like you said, the
sort of suburban menace books, like House Guest and Neighbors.
I have that one. Give me like, what would you recommend?
Oh, if you haven't read House Guest, I would recommend that. That's a very interesting book.
House Guest.
Really, almost like a Kafka-esque book, but very feminist too, in a really strange way.
You mentioned Kafka. There's no Kafka stories in here, so you've written a bunch of Kafka.
I left out the entire. The one I thought about was called K for Fake,
right?
Which is my story that conflates Orson Welles and Kafka, and and a few other things, but especially Orson Welles and Kafka, which of course Orson Welles himself did because he filmed the trial. Uh, and I looked at that book of Kafka stories, and it seemed sort of like a diamond, like an uncuttable object. Everything in it seemed to work only on the terms of that little collection. And something I was very conscious of too was that I sometimes have filled stories, maybe to a fault, with cultural references, and some cultural references age out. And I actually had a kind of a taster, much younger reader who I really admire and believe in, read the book and let me know which pieces didn't land for them. There's some things I'm very proud of that I just can't see how much of them have become opaque with time. And K for Fake left her really bewildered. I think the constellation of cultural references, she couldn't click in, she couldn't animate it. So it was like watching card tricks in the dark. I guess that's the joke, right? That influenced my decision to leave even that story out, although I'm very, very proud of that story. But it's fine where it is. It's fine in the Kafka book.
Well, you got me listening to Odessa after reading the last story in this collection. I was like, I don't think I've ever heard this song. This character seems to really like Odessa, and so I've ventured into that. Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
It really wants headphones. It's really a good headphone song.
Oh yeah, okay.
Well, this has been so amazing. I feel like we just got started on our questions, and now
I know we could talk so much
in an hour, but especially related to this book and the stage of sort of life where you're in, where you've got this book coming out now, just any kind of final thoughts of like where your mind is at right now as we're speaking here in the fall of 2025.
Well, Matt, that's such a nice invitation. I mean, it's an interesting time. The book is like 2 weeks from coming out, but I see it as part of, in a way, maybe the last in a sequence of the really uncanny moments that have clustered around my 60th birthday, which is to say that the Fortress of Solitude and Motherless Brooklyn got pulled into the Everyman's Library, which was like a kind of crazy dream for me. Very cool. Surreal, because I grew up just seeing those books on used bookstore shelves, and the notion of the sort of it's just it doesn't need explaining. It was just really an extraordinary gift, and then having a Brooklyn crime novel in the rearview mirror, and landing that particular big fish, which in a sense I felt it kind of completed the work that was undone in the Fortress of Solitude in some way. And then getting to assemble these two collections, Cellophane Bricks, and then especially this one, Different Kind of Tension, that encompass my whole experience of being a writer. I don't want to be flippant about illness or death, but there is this sort of like, oh, it would be okay now. I have all kinds of ambitions and all kinds of, not just ambitions, but I have the excitement, the physical day-to-day, pleasure of trying to make something new, trying to surprise myself, be ingenious, be fascinating, and maybe even be great. But I also feel like, oh, I've put something down on the earth. Yeah. I set something down, and it's a marker, and these things, these 3 or 4 books in this period kind of they constellate as a kind of marker for me. So that makes interesting space looking ahead. Like, okay, the horizon is different if I feel that.
Mm-hmm. Well, go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I kind of had a thought related to this, which is like, I've always sort of primarily thought of you as a novelist first and foremost, with, some other incidental pieces of writing around that. But this collection sort of works to challenge that notion that you're like, exclusively a novelist or a master of the novel. And so like having a collection like this at this point in your life, showing the range of what you can do with fiction, I find to be really engaging and enthralling. You kind of think of like a lot of the pieces in this story remind me of seem kindred to me with the ways that George Saunders writes short fiction and the kinds of themes that he works with, like a lot of dystopian technophobia kind of stuff too. So I see you guys as like great sort of pals in that regard. What is it about the short story that does it for you, that like, or what do you think a short story can do that a novel can't do? Is there anything that like engages you more about this platform than, say, the novel?
Well, I mean, first of all, let me consent that, I've spent the lion's share of my energies on making the novels, the 13 novels to this point, and that's just sort of it is my pure condition. Yeah. I wake up thinking about, what's the next page of the novel that I'm working on supposed to look like? And if I'm really far away from that, I'm usually feeling kind of bad, like, I should be working on a novel. But I'm very proud of the stories, so I'm really grateful for what you say. I mean, it truly means a lot to think that this book makes a case that for this commitment. And I think when I've been asked to explain the title, which I've been asked a couple of times. Of course, there's the flippant, Buzzcocks reference in there, but the tension I have in mind is partly the tension between the long and short forms, and the way that it almost every novelist writes stories sometimes, and certainly every short story writer is asked, when are you going to write a novel? So it's assumed that the two things come to the same artists mostly, and I've taken that as a given, and always tried to do both. But what is the short story for? And especially if you've found a home in the novel, if you know how to use the novel and with all its amplitude, and it's very it's very demanding, but also very forgiving form in a sense, because you can, Randall Jarrell has that remark that the definition of a novel is a long narrative, or a narrative of a certain length that has something wrong with it. Like novels can have, you can even have like 50 bad pages, tedious. Oh, why is this character here? And then you get back to the good part and you can end up mostly thinking it's a really great novel. Right. Definitely.
Short stories are more compressed and
absolutely not just,
but have a lot of room for error, right?
You have much less room for error, but also you're in a formal situation at every point.
I think there's stuff that could have been cut out of Infinite Jest, to be honest. There's stuff in there.
I was just thinking about that too, man.
I was like, we could have cut some stuff out. We know damn well what could have been cut out of there.
I think it's possible. So with a short story, I mean, the comparison that comes naturally for me, but it took me a long time to get there, is it's more like a painting. You're always, when you look at a painting, no matter how large it is, you always are conscious of the relation of the interior to the edge. You're always within sight of the frame. Yeah. A novel is immersive. I mean, some more obviously than others. Moby Dick or Infinite Jest, you're lost inside it. But really, every novel, even relatively brief ones, you're immersed. You're not always conscious of the edges when you're inside that space. But with a short story, the pressure of the frame touches every choice you make.
And I remember talking to someone who didn't read a lot of books, and I was trying to convince them to buy a book, and they were not a book person, right? This is a hard sell. And they opened it and looked at it and said, oh, it's stories. I could read that. Because I could read one before bed or something. Whereas it's a hard sell for a 1,000-page novel.
This is another great. I'm so glad you said this, Matt, because this is another thing that distinguishes a short story. Everyone tells stories. Everyone tells jokes. I mean, jokes are in the form of short stories. Mm-hmm. Everyone goes around and has an anecdote that they like to tell. Everyone tries a joke at a party sometimes, and some people try them all the time. Some people, like, half of their social reality is that they've got a lot of stories or memorized a lot of jokes about,
Well, and being married, you come home from work at the end of the day. What did you do today? That's the story. Like, I woke up, I went to work, it was bad, I met this guy, we came home.
Absolutely.
All of that.
So they're while on one hand they might be sort of more Mandarin, they're a little more, like diamond cutting, perfectionist, more like a poem. Yeah. In another sense, they're a little more like something casual. Mm-hmm. Like, what's your story?
Right.
Tell me a story.
Yeah.
Well, I moved to Brooklyn in 1999. Motherless Brooklyn had just come out, and it was the first book that I bought with the word Brooklyn on the cover. When I was living in Brooklyn. I was very excited to be living in Brooklyn, and I was moved there for a job in book publishing. Everyone in book publishing was reading this book and recommending it to each other, and I blew through that book so fast and read it again, lost that copy, gave it to a roommate. I don't know what happened to the copy. I was living on the other side of Prospect Park and like right off Bedford where it crosses Eastern Parkway. And when Fortress of Solitude came out, I remember just the pleasure of it being, I know where this is. I know, I could visualize
I've
it.
walked these streets.
Yeah. And so it means a lot to me to be in conversation with you here today. I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule and busy life to be in conversation with us. It means a lot to me. I never could have imagined back then, 26 years ago, to be talking with you today. So.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a real. It's genuinely moving to me, Matt, and these connections through time are a form of privilege and good luck. I mean, I've become a serious fan of what you do in those two short novels, and I want to see more from you. And
yeah, they're damn good, aren't they?
So it's exciting to be, what luck we have to be in this space, right?
Yeah.
Indeed.
To add to what Matt said, Jonathan, is that when I was doing my master's in English 12 years ago, I was taking a course called Writing the American City, New York, and Chronic City was on the syllabus for that. And the prof of that course, he was kind of the professor that I had that got me into literary fiction with Don DeLillo's White Noise in a third year American fiction class. And I felt when I was reading Chronic City that this book was like written to me because like the Infinite Jest and Wallace references were just so funny and so cute. And I actually wrote my first conference paper that got published. My first publication was on Chronic City's relationship to Infinite Jest.
Wow.
And the way that I thought that you kind of were embodying Wallace's kind of like literary rebel of sincerity. That the tower, like the church tower in Chronic City, which kind of serves as like the one point of reality and all this kind of hyper surrealism, was kind of like some kind of nod to like, a serious view of life, or maybe even like possibly a spiritual view of life, or some kind of grounding force like that. So yeah, to have you on the show, 12 years later is also like an incredible and very cool thing. So thanks again.
Thank you, Dave. That's very kind.
Time. Yeah.
I'll give you a little crumb. The working title of that novel was "Those Birds in That Tower."
Okay. Yeah, I actually just reread my essay like right before we got on the call, just to like refresh. And yeah, I talked about the birds in that piece. Yeah. They're in there. Yeah.
That's awesome.
That's cool.
Thank you, guys.
My Slice of Sky was the title.
Thanks for everyone listening to. I want to say, if you've enjoyed the show, please give us a rating or review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. We also have a Patreon, patreon.com/concavity show. If you'd like to become a sustaining member, get access to our bonus episodes. We are at Concavity Show on Instagram,
which is about the only
social
media that we're using anymore.
You can email us, concavityshow@gmail.com. We love it when people reach out to us with comments on email. Yeah. We also have a Threadless store, which you can access on our website, concavityshow.com, or on our Patreon. And we will be back with a new episode soon.
Yeah. And Jonathan, before we let you go, is there anything you want to sort of formally plug at the end as well, or where can people reach out to you, find you?
Oh, geez.
Find out about your next project?
I'm on the shelves. It's really simple, and you've done a really lovely job of reminding people of that. But I do have this Instagram now as well. It's another
I've been enjoying that
form of embarrassment for me because I'm such a late adopter, congenital late adopter. But I'm there now, and weirdly enjoying it. So
cool.
Come find me.
Awesome. Speaking of the shelves, I want to do a quick shout out to our friend Amy Peltier, Matt, who's on episode 19 of this podcast. She, in the last 2 weeks, opened a romance bookstore in Vancouver. Oh, cool. It's called Perfect Match. And if you ever find yourself in the downtown east side of Vancouver, go check out Amy's bookstore. It is had an absolutely nuts opening day, like around the block lineup. People were in line for hours. It's been gangbusters ever since. So big shout out to Amy for keeping the dream of brick and mortar bookstores alive. We love that. I know it's a big part of what you were talking about too, Jonathan. So right on. Cool. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Into darkness.